You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to get back on the path of a thread of thought that we've had a few episodes past, and it's always kind of interwoven in a lot of the content we've got here on this show. We're going to talk about holistic management, and I can tell you in the coaching world, particularly with those of us who are practitioners with the International Coaching Federation, there is a principle and belief about you got to look at the whole person. And that means you can't just approach things academically or intellectually. You have to allow some of the emotional experiences to enter in. And I know for a lot of folks, that's a hard thing to do. There are all manner of dimension that gets invoked when we start thinking about this. We can get into the conundrum of gender biases in management and female execs versus male execs and all of that. But I've asked a guest who does a lot of great work in that space to join us today. Her name is Katherine Lazaruk. Katherine, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, that was a mouthful of a lead-in. How about that? Kind of stacking the deck here. So no pressure, but I guess what I would really like to do is start with that first basic question. What, in your view, is holistic management?
It's such a broad concept. So my area of expertise has been in the area of executive presence and executive coaching. And early on in my career, what I noticed was I personally struggled with the boundaries and boxes that I had to fit into in the corporate world. And when I started my own practice, I noticed that I was attracting a lot of clients who felt the same way. So for those people who are listening who feel like they're doing what they need to do to fit in, but they don't feel quite right about it, or they're doing a lot of fast, like momentum, get things done, hammer it out, but they don't feel really connected, those people are kind of left behind in the current structures that we have because we've been conditioned to value productivity and profit over everything else. But that's great for an industrial age, but we're out of that age now. And we're moving into this space where we have machines to do the machine-like things. So we no longer need to act like machines. We need to lean really hard into being human, more human. And what that means is bringing in the embodied dimension of living and bringing the embodied dimension of work. So when I think about holistic management, I think about leaders coming to a place of where they can integrate all of their embodied. So first of all, being embodied, which is tough for a lot of leaders who basically run around with their heads on meat suits and ignore their body a lot of the time, which is why we see burnout and exhaustion and frustration or dissatisfaction. Someone's at the pinnacle of success, but they don't feel happy. That's because they're missing their body. Their head has just been running the show the whole time. And I think it's kind of exciting because we're on the forefront now of the science around this, around embodiment, and actually the information that your body and your feelings give you in order to make better, more rounded decisions. So in management, it's really about a couple of different things. It's about changing the markers of success to include not just profit and not just productivity, but also to include how well do people feel doing these things? How accepted do they feel at work? Are they seen, heard, and valued? Right. Because if everyone is truly seen, heard, and valued, then productivity goes way up. We get way more diversity across companies and profits go up because of it. And I think without those three dimensions, we're really missing the boat.
Well, there's so many things you packed in there that are spinning through my mind, and I'll start with one of the last ones I thought about as you were describing that is for any enterprise, the best indicator, I believe, of employee engagement and employee satisfaction is the notion that your employees are your best spokesman. They bring people to the work to say, you ought to work here. You ought to come join me at what I do because it's such a great place. I feel fulfilled. I see opportunity. I am empowered. I get to do good work. I'd go so far as to say almost on my terms, but that's a tricky thing to say. But you know what I mean?
There's compromise involved.
There's compromise involved, but it's a fit. It's an amazing fit, just like a very comfortable pair of sneakers. It's just right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very Goldilocks for people, right?
Yeah.
Can't be too hard, can't be too soft, has to be just right.
Yeah.
And some people, I think, particularly experienced leaders that I'm running across now, people who have had 30, 40 years in leadership, are having the most cognitive dissonance around this now, because I'm thinking of a leader that I worked with, and he was like, why can't people just come to work and do the job I paid them to do and go home? Like, I don't want to hear about their feelings. I don't want to hear about all those things. And I laughed and I said, oh, they don't need to change. You need to change, because you want people to come and play in your sandbox. But if you don't change the sandbox to make them actually feel at home there, they're just going to leave. And your churn is going to be really high, which is huge in your costs. You're going to have to do a lot of recruiting. You're going to have to do a lot more bringing people in order to make the business function. And it was a big, it was interesting because it was a big kind of aha moment for him, because he was in a position of authority such that he's not really had to change over the last 10 or 15, well, it's maybe even 20 years of his career, because he's been, in the C-suite for a long time. And he does his best to try to listen to his frontline people, but he himself did not have the range, like the emotional resonance and the degree of regulation that was required to sit with someone else who is expressing a feeling in front of him.
Right.
So he would get really uncomfortable. So someone would come in angry because they wanted to change something and they were frustrated. And he would immediately jump to, okay, how do we solve this problem? Which is a typical approach. People want to solve the problems in companies. But what he ended up doing was jumping to solution and sort of suppressing and trying to shut down the emotion of the person in front of him, because it made him feel so uncomfortable. Like, he just had a really hard time with it. And it was even worse when it came to somebody expressing sadness about something, or any of those kinds of things. And the problem is if you suppress your emotion, one emotion, you suppress all emotions. So your life ends up being kind of flat, and your work ends up kind of being flat. And there's no space for people that are feeling people in your workplace.
Well, and I think the challenge for leaders is that the harsh reality is that anyone you've got on your team, they are a fellow human being. And it is why I am a big advocate in my own coaching of reminding people about Maslow's hierarchy of need, that whole theory that humans exist on various levels, and the most basic level is survival, or the bear's going to eat me. Go back to the caveman days, and we have to have that need fulfilled. And in a modern first world way, most of us have that need fulfilled. We've got shelter, we've got food, we've got water. We don't have to really worry like that. But then you move on, you begin moving up these elevations of existence, and without going through all of the levels, the pinnacle of Maslow's pyramid is this notion of self-actualization, and that's where the real work gets done.
Right.
So it's like, wait a minute, you got 4 or 5 levels, depending on which version of the theory you get into. You got 4 or 5 levels to get through before you can get work done? Really?
Right.
Seriously? But yet at the same time, the leaders I talk to that don't initially want to buy that, they will be quick to admit, not everybody on my team gives me what I want, in production.
No.
Well, guess what, Bubba? Have you enabled them to, show up on the right level? And have you built an environment and a culture that optimizes that?
Mhm.
And even if you've done all that, there are going to be days where Bob or Sally is going to show up and they're not going to be themselves.
Mhm.
And you go, what's going on? Come on, snap out of it, get over it. Let's get to work. And the person is just really literally unable because they've got such a heavy burden somewhere else in their life.
Mhm. Yeah, the phrase snap out of it or suck it up or those kinds of phrases just make me cringe. Like inside, I'm like, oh, because it's so cruel on a basic level. And at any moment, even the people who are very aware of themselves, even people who are generally really well regulated, at any moment, something could happen that knocks you right back to being your 5-year-old self in the principal's office getting in trouble. And I think when leaders want people to snap out of it, they kick them back into that area where they don't feel safe. And if people don't feel safe in their body, if they don't feel safe in the environment, they're not going to be showing up as their full selves. They're not going to be giving you all of what they can give you on any given day. And I really liked what you said about people showing up. Like people have this idea in our culture that, you got to show up and give 110% every day. But the truth of it is your 100% every day might be 50% one day, and maybe you feel more energetic another day. Like as long as the group together equals 100%, that's great. But it's that give and take in relationship where I'm going to show up. This is how I feel today. Oh, I have a little bit more energy. I can cover you there. Or I have a little less energy today. Can you help me with this? It's that give and take. And that requires a higher level of communication skill than a lot of people are prepared to invest in. And it requires a vulnerability that people might not be willing to invest in. Right? Like personally, going through emotional work has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, 100%. And every client that I work with, every time they're willing to go there, it's always better on the other side. So I like to say to people, I'm like, come on over. The water's warm. Like, it's nice over here. It's nice to be cared for. It's nice to feel like you're included. That doesn't mean that we don't kick ass every now and again, but we still need to attend to the person first and attend to their heart and soul first before we can go to their brain.
Right. Well, there's another reality that as I have gotten into reading and studying a little bit about the amazing things that are being done with brain science these days, all of the studies and all of the models and the insight we're getting, the brain scientists tell us that if we, back to the theme, we're back as human beings, if anything happens that sends us into that fight or flight mode, there is a literal chemical change in your brain chemistry that, number one, all of the blood flow is taken away from your frontal cortex and put in other centers of the brain that mobilize and energize and get the adrenaline flowing and all those things preparing for the fight or flight. But guess what? The frontal cortex is where work is done.
Yeah, that's right. It's your governance modality, your governance mechanism, right?
And so you're the boss and you're sitting there. Come on, Fred, why you don't seem like yourself? I need this report done. Where's your TPS report? And, it's like, no, I'm not there. I'm in the other mode. I've got other things going on. So I know we're hitting real heavy kind of on the employee side. So what is a leader to do to lean in and optimize all of these parameters we've been talking about?
I think that if a leader wants to become more human, can see the value in this, has read up on the brain science, has read up on the body science, and understands that, oh yeah, this is where I need to go. The first place is, I always say, go within to go without. So even if you've done a ton of work, even if you've gotten all the management degrees and you've done great and you've encouraged people, are you really connected to your own body? Do you know what's happening when you have, like, can you describe the sensations in your body when you're having a thought or a feeling? Do you identify, can you describe it? Do you know its temperature? Do you know its color? Do you know its, like, does it feel prickly? Like, how do you feel in your body? And how do you feel, I want to say sensually, but I mean, in your sensation, right? When you're in a room, in a boardroom, are you all up in your head and you're ignoring your body? Like, you wake up 3 hours later and go, oh yeah, right, I didn't eat today. Like, if you're just completely heady, now is the time to start sinking down into your body. And so there are a number of ways to do that. There's mindfulness practices, breathing, just take a breath. When you're a leader and you're trying to get something from your team and you think it's super urgent, the truth is nothing is that urgent, unless it's a tax compliance deadline, which is kind of important, or if it's you're in brain surgery and someone's going to die. I really think sometimes in business, we all take ourselves a little too seriously, and we all take the shareholders a little too seriously. And yes, of course, business needs to make money. But the truth is, there's always going to be more work to do tomorrow.
Right.
And it's really difficult to decondition. It's a ton of deprogramming that experienced leaders need to do to break out of this idea of motivate, push, 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 go, go, go. Like, particularly North American culture is pretty bad for this, right? We run at incredibly high, fast, hard levels, which is why you see record levels of people dying early, burning out, being exhausted. And that doesn't benefit anyone in the long run. So if you're an experienced leader and you're interested in this, the first place to look is at yourself. How connected am I to my body? Am I just going to the gym and working out because it's a utilitarian practice? Or am I really thinking about what's going on with my digestion? What's going on with my skin? What's going on with my movement? What am I wearing on my body that makes me feel comfortable? Really spend some time connecting your head to your heart, connecting your head to your body, so that you can actually begin to have feelings and let them move through you. And then as you increase your range of resonance for feeling, then you have more support for other people's feelings as well. And I think men have really gotten the short end of the stick on this one, because women at least tend to foster communities of support. Women are allowed to have a larger emotional range of expression allowed in our society than men are. And I really feel for some of my men leaders that I work with who literally end up crying in my office because the stress on them is so high and they feel they have to perform at such a high level. It is inhuman. The expectations for men are inhuman.
Right.
And I think that like, as we go into this, men have a really great opportunity to lead the way on this and to say, hey, what does it actually mean to be a man in this world? Do I have to be stoic? Do I have to not feel things? Because that's not human. It's not realistic. It's crazy.
Well, and in some of the larger, perhaps even global brand type companies that I've had a chance to do work with, it's unbelievable the trend of leadership archetypes that have risen up the ranks and served the company. And now you've got next generation climbing up, and you've got people that might initially have some of this more holistic thinking, but they convince themselves that that doesn't serve the archetype I'm supposed to be. So they peel their own skin and they try to put on this other armor of whatever the successful leaders of the last 30 years were. And they begin showing up that way. And I've had numerous instances where I'll share real quickly, not to get too deep in the weeds, but one of the elements, one of the modalities I like to follow in my own coaching is something that's known as presence-based coaching. It would be like Hey, Catherine, we're here today. We're having a news session. Tell me what you're up against right now. What's going on? What are you dealing with? And that becomes our springboard for getting into whatever aspect of leadership development we're working on. But we try to solve for the immediate concern. And what I get a lot of with these guys, they'll be describing how they're thinking about the matter and all that. And I'll go, where did that come from? Where did you get
Yeah.
that idea?
Yeah.
And they will often point, well, that's how the guy before me and the guy before that and the guy before that,
Right.
that's how they did this job. And I'm going, yeah, but when you worked for them, did it work for you? When they did that? And inevitably they would say, no, not really.
No, then why are you doing that?
And then it's, why are you doing it to your guys? Your folks.
It's a little bit like dysfunctional families or dysfunctional parenting, right? Your parents cannot give you what they didn't get unless they do the difficult work of deprogramming,
right?
Figuring it out. And I think what we really need to see is not only more experienced leaders being willing to at least open the door and make space for this new type of leadership at the table. That's, I think, the chief thing that the most experienced leaders can do is make space. Just admit you don't know how to do it and back out, or dig in and learn about it and then work with the people who know how to do it. But start looking for leaders in your company that have this strong embodied presence, that have this good emotional capacity, and start elevating them instead of just elevating people that you're comfortable with that have that same narrow emotional range that you have, so you don't have to deal with it. Like, to me, that's lazy. That's lazy leadership. If you only hire people that have the exact same qualities you have, lazy. Well, that's a failure of leadership.
Totally agree. And I think closely related to that, let's talk a little bit about as people do climb up the ladder, if they choose to somehow alter their management style because of their perception of what the new job demands, there is often a tendency to become less and less authentic or relatable.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking is more on the relatable side. And I had an experience several years ago. Again, I'm not going to name names, but suffice it to say, it was a large global brand I was doing some coaching work in, and we were talking about the current round of employee engagement survey. And the interesting factoid that came out of that is every level in the organization said, I wish my bosses were more relatable.
Right.
And guess what? That level said, I wish my bosses were more relatable. And that level said, and it went all the way up the hierarchy in the company.
That's right.
And you go, so the guy that is being told he's not relatable by the people underneath him wants his boss to be more relatable. How does that really work? And it was a shocking revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the mission and the scope of what we were challenged as coaches to help the leaders lean into was the idea, okay, we have a tradition to be fairly mechanic, fairly stoic about and it was a very old school, like 100-year tradition of command and control.
Yeah.
So again, it was that, well, the guy before me did it this way, so he was successful. So I'm assuming I have to do it that way to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And the chairman actually had the wisdom to say, no, guys, we got to change this.
That's right.
Culture around us is changing, and if we don't change, we're not going to attract new talent. So.
That's right. It's interesting. The way that I look at it is the old model was hierarchical, authoritative, and compartmentalized. So you could rely on your authority to get things done, your positional authority. And you were encouraged to leave whatever happens at home and come to work and leave whatever happens at work. Like, don't take that home with you, right? Compartmentalize everything. But now, even in the world, the model is more integrated. So we want people to be integrated in themselves, but also integrated in society. We got lots of different people hanging out together, and we need to understand each other a bit better. Integrated, it's much more relational. So when you say relatable, I think relational, and then whole. Like, how holistic can we be? Can we look at the whole world? Can we look at the whole industry? Can we look at the whole company? Can we look at each other as whole? Can we see and accept each other in our wholeness? And in the relatable part, I think with companies that I work with, we have to do a lot of discussion around what does relatable look like? What does that mean? And it almost always comes down to common ground and connection. What are the points of connection that we can find? Like, for example, I did a session with a finance team that I was working with, and everybody had to pair up, and we were doing the 5 things race, which is, okay, you need to figure out 5 things you have in common with this person as fast as possible. And then we do several rounds of that. And the stuff that comes out of those exercises is remarkable. And the fellow that there was an uneven number, so I ended up pairing up with one of the sort of very, very masculine men on the team. And he's very, very sweet. And we ended up pairing up, and we got talking about a variety of things. And he said at the end of it, he goes, I thought that you and I would have nothing in common at first. And he goes, look at all these things we have in common. Like, for example, we talked about learning in Canada, learning hockey language in self-defense. Right? If you're going to talk about, you at least need to know what's happening in the game. Like, and that was like, my brother played hockey, my dad coached hockey. Hockey's a great game. I'm not a big sportsy person, but I still know what offside is. I still know like the parlance of the game, so I can still talk about it with people who love hockey, and I appreciate a passion. So it's that commonality. There were a couple of other things that we struck on, but I just thought it was interesting because people think they have nothing in common with people, but we have a lot more in common with each other than you might realize. And it's all based on the fact that we're all having a human experience.
Right.
Whatever your spirituality is, it's like, personally, I think you're a soul having a human experience. This is like mystery school. We're like all here to learn something. And that connects us on a very, very deep and basic level in ways that nothing else will. So we need to lean into being human and get out of acting like machines.
Well, and I think one of the tripwires when we start coaching about relatability and relationship, I've had clients jump immediately to push back to say, I'm not going to make friends at work. And
Right?
you go, okay, no, that's not what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can be friendly without creating friendships.
Yeah, we're not talking about oversharing.
Yeah.
It's okay to be private.
Yeah.
But there are ways of connecting and being relatable to somebody at work that don't involve creating intimacies, because it is true that if you step over boundaries at work, it can make things messy.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Right. But that doesn't mean, like, so I often talk with my leaders about the appropriate level of self-disclosure, right? And how disclosure at the appropriate time in the appropriate way can actually create a stronger bond. Oversharing destroys it. So you have to find that balance. And that's a real skill to figure out, okay, how much should I share with who and when in order to create this connection? And how much do I need to keep myself to myself?
Well, and there's no denying that certain elements of our own experience, either professional or personal, can allow us to become empathetic and connect with people. Because when an employee comes and says, I've got a sick child, and it's not just a normal childhood sickness, it's going to be more serious. It is X, Y, and Z. And if the leader either has had an experience like that in their family, or they've known somebody else, and they can say, man, I'm with you. I know exactly what that burden is. And then they share a little bit. Well, you're not necessarily getting extremely intimate, but it becomes that touch point, that bridge of connection to say, you know, I'm there with you. I understand.
Yeah, it's the Me Too factor. The I've been there also. That is a human experience. I understand what you might be feeling. Or if I don't have kids, I can still imagine how scary that might be for you.
Right.
And there's that connection on that emotional level. But I think the big piece of this, though, is I don't know about the leaders that you work with, but there are a lot of leaders that I work with that have been highly rewarded for their workaholic tendencies, because workaholism is the most rewarded addiction in our society. And they have an inner critical loop that is so hard on them, like cruel, vicious, awful. And if they, as leaders, learn to develop a more gentler voice inside themselves, they're much better at connecting more gently with others. And I think that in our world, we could do with more gentleness all around, more gentleness, less cruelty in general.
Well, as you were describing all that, I agree totally. And I'm thinking about a case I knew of. I did not have the good fortune of meeting this gentleman, but the stories about him were kind of legend in this company. It's a smaller but publicly traded company I was doing some work with, and I had about 10 or 12 of their leaders. We were doing individual coaching, and one day I dialed in, and my client was just in tears, just very distraught. And I said, "Oh my goodness, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, so-and-so, who was their chief legal counsel, in-house counsel, the day before had literally passed away in his office at his desk. Just thunk, he was on a Zoom call and just thunk, and that was it." Well, the reason she was so distraught was that this person, even though he was chief legal counsel, and you can conjure up all kinds of connotations of who and what those guys tend to be, this man had a reputation of perpetual connection with every employee in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And to see him in the hallway was not a dogged, blustery, you get out of my way, I'm the chief counsel kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But he was, "Hey, how was Johnny's play last week?" And they go, people would go, "You remember that? How did you?" And he just had this art of connecting with everybody, and he was deeply loved by everybody. Well, over the next couple of weeks, as my sessions continued with others there at the company, every one of them had their own story about what the impact this person had had in their life. And you know what? Not a single one of those stories had anything to do with a legal matter pertaining to the company. Nothing.
Yeah. No.
Nothing.
And yet he still did his job.
Oh, he was amazing.
Totally great at it. Yeah.
He had been the tip of the spear, leading the company public, taking the company public, dealing with all the regulators and, all of those really technical and highly skilled, very impactful. I mean, millions and millions of dollars of value associated with each transaction. He was good at his job.
Of course. But you get to have it all.
Right.
Sorry, I've interrupted you. Just sorry. I was just so excited about it. I feel very emphatic about this, that you get to have it all, in the sense of you can be great at your work and you can have a big heart too.
Yeah.
You have to do both. You don't have to sacrifice one for the other, right? That just leads to resentment. It leads to all kinds of sickness. It leads to cruelty. It's like you can have both. My belief is we don't live in an either or world. We live in an and world.
Right.
It's not this or that. It's both of those things. And I think the more I'm actually loving now that in the media and in the world, we're starting to see examples of leaders who are more balanced. Not necessarily like if you think sort of masculine archetype, feminine archetype, we're starting to see leaders that have a little bit of both. Like they've got what would classically be considered sort of a feminine heart, a feminine warmth, and they also have masculine structure. Like they're really good at the nuts and bolts of things. And that doesn't matter what gender they are or if they're non-binary or anything else. They have this lovely balance. They've learned to figure out how to draw from both things so that they are balanced people, and then they help create balanced cultures. And if someone's a little bit more on the structure side, they can work on having a little more heart, or they need to find people on their board that have more heart so the company overall is balanced.
Well, I think that's one of the big messages here and takeaways to leaders. If first it's the challenge to do the self-assessment and say, where do I really sit on this? I am feeling a tug, I am feeling a frustration or a disconnect of some kind. There's this underlying vibe of we're not quite where we need to be. What's that about? What can I do? And as you pointed out early, having that willingness to really do the deep dive. How did you put it? Within and without?
Go within to go without.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's taking that self-assessment journey, and whether you need to get a 360 feedback to start the process, or hire a coach to come in and work with you or something, but explore the possibilities of what that shift and pivot can look like. And then I think some great things can come from that.
I think it's about giving yourself some grace and understanding that you're here for a long time. It'd be nice if it was a good time, right? It doesn't all have to be so hard.
Right.
You don't have to be so hard on yourself, and you don't have to be so hard on the people around you. You
Right.
can get great things done with heart.
I love it. And I think that's a good punctuation point and a place we probably ought to wrap up. I think we're about on time, Katherine. But tell the people the best way to get a hold of you if they are interested in learning more about your work.
I'm easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn, Katherine Lazaruk, Lazaruk for the Canadians and Lazaruk for the Americans in the room. And my latest book, Executive Being, Humanizing Business One Leader at a Time, is available for pre-order on Amazon. So if you want to go check that out and learn how to humanize a bit more, that's where you can find it. And you can always find me. I'm happy to meet people on LinkedIn, and I hang out on Instagram too.
Great. Well, as always, folks, we will have that info in the show notes. So if you're out there listening on your favorite streaming service, make a note to hop back and check out those links when you get back to your another device. It'll give you that info. But one last time, Katherine, thanks for sitting in. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to talk with you here and on the pre-call, and look forward to staying in touch.
Likewise. Well, folks, with that, I do like to remind you that we have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense, and you will see excerpts of this out on Instagram, Twitter, and other places along the way. But for now, we are going to sign off, say goodbye, and go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.